We are one people, one family, the human family, and what affects one of us affects us all. John Lewis. Yo, guys, what is going on? It is bright and early on this Friday, July 31st. Welcome back to the sixth episode of TTP. We're really excited to have you. Now, this episode marks the end of our second week and our John Lewis tribute week. Rest in peace. We're very excited. We have some big things planned. And we also have a good friend of ours on the pod, Ankit Rustagi.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you. We thought you would be a good fit for this episode. And Keshav, you got anything to say about the episode?
Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at the NFL Top 100 list that was just released a few days ago. Now, this list does spark some controversy or some questions, but it's a player-voted list, so we just all, though, have our complaints about some certain placements. And what we're going to be doing today, along with Ankit, is we're going to be each choosing a couple players that we think are too high on the list and a couple players that we think are too low on the list. And we're just going to be doing it almost like a serpentine draft type of thing. So I think if Ankit is ready to make his first selection, we'll be ready to begin.
Yeah, so I just want to start off. I think one of the players that I find to be too low on this ranking would be Marcus Peters. I felt like this past year, especially during his time playing it in that Baltimore defense, I feel like he really stepped up, and it showed as he was selected to the Pro Bowl, and he was even a first-team All-Pro. And yeah, that's my first pick.
As a Chiefs fan and like Marcus Peters being a former Chiefs player, I'm just curious. Like, what's the perception of Marcus Peters like as a Chiefs fan? Are you guys against him, or what's the whole deal? I mean, obviously you seem to be high on him.
Yeah, I was pretty sad to hear when he got traded to the LA Rams. I mean, he was a solid player. Of course, he liked to talk quite a lot, and I felt like it just brought like this certain aggression to the defense. And of course, his on-the-field performance was insane. And I feel like, especially now, I feel like our cornerbacks really miss that.
And quick, so he's 53rd on the list, by the way. For those of you who don't have it open, so he's 53rd. He thinks he should be higher.
And I mean, I think for Marcus Peters, with the first half of the season with the Rams, I think he wasn't doing too well. But he really picked it up when he got traded to the Ravens, I would say. And I think it's a well-deserved ranking. I would say it's about right. I mean, just looking at it and comparing it to other guys is the way, you're kind of looking about how this is voted on. Like, would you put Marcus Peters above, for example, Devontae Adams? Would you put him above, there's a lot of guys that I feel that could be put above or below him, but I think he's at a pretty good place.
I mean, if you're looking within the position, that's what I would do. He's ranked behind. He's ranked the nearest cornerback. So Trey White. Then the next guy above that is Jalen Ramsey. And then
that's it. And Jalen Ramsey and then
Gilmore.
Richard Sherman too.
Richard Sherman. So he's fifth, right? I get the idea of wanting to put respect on Marcus's name. He's insane. Like, I was really shocked. I wasn't as shocked about the Chiefs trade as I was about the Rams trade. They didn't get much at all. They got like a fifth or a fourth plus a depth middle linebacker. And I know, Keshav, you said that he wasn't playing his best. Sure, like he got burned more than a few times, but he still had that big play tendency on the Rams early this season and last year. And I just think with the Ravens, he cleaned up some of those technical issues he had, those, I guess, mechanical issues. He was playing in a better defensive backfield.
Yeah.
And he really played, like, he's ranked fifth here. He played honestly better than that. I thought he was better than Jalen Ramsey last year, at least. But I don't know. Yeah. Definitely an interesting pick, though. I can respect it, though. And Chirag, yes, you can talk about your guy too low.
So for my guy, I thought Marlon Humphrey had an amazing season. Third year player here, 24 years old. Great cornerback this season. He had a lot of great moments. For example, when he forced that fumble from Juju. It was a tough loss because Juju was on my fantasy team at the time, but He just really broke out the season. He had 3 picks, great tackling, cornerback with 65 combined tackles. And he was really a cornerstone for that Ravens defense, especially before Marcus Peters came in. He really led that defense to a lot of victories. I think he was criminally underrated in these rankings at 86.
What was his rating? 86.
He was at 86. So I think he was also first team All-Pro. So he was in elite company this entire season. And I was confused to see his ranking at 86 this year.
I will say I agree with everything. I do think he was underrated. I was thinking about making him one of my guys. The tackling comment I think is overrated though. 65 combined tackles is a lot, but that's not a good thing. He missed 17% of his tackles, and that was actually down from 18% his rookie year. So he misses quite a few tackles, but I don't know. He's definitely got, like, he's a physical player. He's gonna get better at that aspect of his game, coverage wise. I mean, this guy's amazing. I don't understand how he got ranked 80 in the 80s. He's elite. He's the reason they were able to bench Jamie Smith. Like, how Richard Sherman was talking about this on PFF the other day. Like, that Baltimore backfield is so deep, defensive backfield.
I honestly think, I mean, we could even debate whether Marlon Humphrey should be above Marcus Peters or not. I think Marlon Humphrey's very low, and I mean he had the most passes defended on the team. He had 3 fumble returns and 2 forced fumbles. I mean, he's a really integral part of that defense.
Yeah, I'm sure Ankit has something.
This season he had a lot of those peanut punch fumbles that we've seen a lot in the past season. Yeah, he even returned 3 fumbles, so I think he's a really scrappy, agile corner. And I mean, he's going to continue to grow and improve, but I think he should have been rated higher this year.
You think he should have been higher than Ankit's guy?
I mean, it's hard to argue with Marcus Peters just because of his performance, especially statistically even. Marcus Peters really shined this year, so it's tough for me to make that statement. But I think he should be in the conversation as a higher cornerback in the NFL 100 rankings.
Okay, what do you think about that? I mean, I don't know. Like, personally, I think the season for Humphrey is better, but I don't know. Peters makes sense.
I mean, I agree with Chirag. I feel like Marlon should definitely be higher, but like, I don't know. I felt like when you brought up the missed tackles part, I felt like, that definitely separated the fact like whether he should be above Marcus or not. But I feel like just the common theme of this is like the Baltimore defense was definitely underrated on this list. I mean, I feel like they should have definitely been in maybe the 40s or even 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And actually,
I mean, also
really quick missed tackle. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Marlon he took the role of the number 1 cornerback. He took all the hard matchups. So I don't know. That isn't really shown in the stats, but I still think he has an argument for being higher than Marcus Peters, but for sure he should be higher on the NFL 100 list.
Mm-hmm. And then Keshav. What do you want?
Yeah, so for my first 2 low, I would say Austin Eckler. And Austin Eckler, I mean, he had a really great season in Melvin Gordon's absence. He was arguably one of Phillip Rivers' favorite targets, putting up 993 yards. And he didn't start all 16 games either. He started only 8 of those games, and he still put up really impressive numbers, right? And, I mean, he averaged around 6.9 yards per touch, 1,550 yards from scrimmage, his career high. So, he was a very effective weapon for that team.
Yeah. Talk about Eckler's ranking on this list. It's not
existent. It's not there. He's just not even there. And I feel like, especially even looking at the guys the 10 outside of that list, I would say he should be above nearly all of those guys.
Dude, Uncle Lenny is terrible. Like, can we talk about that? He's not a good running back.
And he had a good season the year before, but I mean, this year he just wasn't up to par. Right.
Mm-hmm. I do think we should. We talked about those Baltimore guys for a while, so speed through the next few picks a little faster. My guy, and then I'm gonna take 2 guys actually, right? Because we're going a little serpentine here. So my first guy is gonna be Devontae Adams, who, initially he's always going to be the guy on an underrated list or whatever for me because fantasy legend for myself. I've had him for 2 years in a row. Love the guy. He was ranked 57th this year, which really, really surprised me. Directly above him, I prefer Devontae over Stephon Diggs. I prefer him over Amari Cooper. These are great players. I don't know if they're overrated or not, but again, I'd rather have Devontae over those guys. Godwin was really good, but for Devontae to be 19 spots behind Chris Godwin's a little intense. I just pulled up some brief stats for Devontae. So early in the season, he had that whole turf toe issue, and that clearly bothered him. And also, they were getting used to a new offense. So I did want to more look at the end of the season where he was honestly at a Michael Thomas level. Michael Thomas, a record-setting year. Michael Thomas is ranked 5th, which is understandable. You could argue that he should be lower, but okay, he set a bunch of records. Whatever. What are you gonna do? But Devontae, last 9 games, so starting from week 10, going through the conference championship, a lot of good defenses he played against. He 11 targets a game, 7.6 receptions a game, 97 yards per game, which basically translates to 1,600 yards over a full season, 7 touchdowns over those 9 weeks. And I know that fantasy isn't like everything, but I think it's a decent way to measure. In half PPR, he was 18.2 points per game versus Michael Thomas 18.8. So he was probably a top 2 receiver in the NFL over those last 9 weeks. So I just think it was criminally low for Devontae Adams. Just the turf toe, that was the only thing. I don't know. Do you guys think?
And no, I mean, he definitely is, as players even say in the video, he's one of the best releases and one of the best route runners in the game right now as a receiver. And I mean, he was on pace to have really good numbers. I would just say if it wasn't for that whole turf toe issue, I think he should have been much higher on that list.
Yeah, and he would have been higher. I'm sure. Yeah. I think he was higher the year before that too. I don't know exactly. If you guys want to check that, but I'm gonna quickly move on to my next guy, another receiver. There's gonna be a lot of receivers on this list, just because there was a lot of them in the top 100. My next guy was Robert Woods. Bobby Trees wasn't even, like Austin Eckler, wasn't even in the top 100 or the 10 ensuing honorable mention spots. Robert Woods is one of those guys who he slips under the radar because I think the touchdown counts are low. He's in a pretty crowded offense, but he's clearly the alpha in this offense as well. Over the last bunch of weeks, I don't have the exact stat pulled up, but Cooper Kupp was off the field a lot more. Robert Woods became the alpha, and he was actually in the last 7 games of the season, the second half of the season, he got about 11.43 targets a game. He had 743 receptions, 94.71 receiving yards. These are numbers that are pretty similar to Devontae Adams, like I just mentioned. That would have been 119 receptions over a full season if we're extrapolating 15 yards. The guy has produced, and the underrated part about him as well, he produces, over the last 2 years, has produced well over 100 yards from the ground too. Does way more things for this offense than he'll ever get credit for, just because people don't look at those stats. He's not even in the top 110. It's outrageous.
No, and as you were saying, I mean, a couple of years before as well, that Rams offense was loaded, right, with Gurley, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks. It's a guy who would be, likely overlooked, but he's still, even in the loaded offense, the year before he posted around 1,200 yards on 86 receptions, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just a really good player, and again, I think I would take him over both the Seahawks receivers put on this list. They're both good, but I'd take Robert Woods over them. I would take him over. There's a lot of guys. Larry Fitz, I would take him over. I would take him over Jarvis Landry, but whatever. That's beside the point. And the next pick, we Keshav.
Yeah. So for my next 2 low pick, I'm going to take Zach Ertz, because Ertz has been a top 3 tight end in the league for the past 3 years, I would say, right? I think we can all agree on that. And I mean, clearly, statistically, things didn't go as well as it did last season, but 916 yards for a tight end is still very good, right? And I mean, I just would say, I guess, the Eagles offense in general wasn't really clicking this year, and I wouldn't really blame that on Zach Ertz. And I think he's ranked at around 85, which I think is extremely low for a guy of his caliber.
Yeah, Ankit, you were talking about him earlier. What are your thoughts on Keshav's selection here?
I mean, I don't want to reveal my pick, but I'll probably go in depth when my turn comes up, and because I have more things I want to say about it, but I don't want to.
That's fair.
My pick, yeah.
Yeah. Also, Keshav, I wanted to add on to that. I love Zach Ertz. Have we talked about him in a previous episode? I mean, if we haven't, let's just talk about it real quick. Great husband. It's a good personality. Anyway, he's in a really it's a really dispersed offense in terms of tight end targets. Dallas Goedert, I believe, is he's extremely highly targeted as well. This is by far, it's not even close when you're looking at teams and tight end targets. It's the Eagles, and it's not even close.
Sure.
And Zach Ertz still manages to put up close to 1,000 yards, which would have been, I think, 5th behind like Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, Andrews, and is that it? I mean, Hooper might have pushed more.
Andrews, but
he played every game.
But
no, Andrews didn't Andrews have 1,000?
Andrews had 852.
Oh wow. Okay, well there you go. Zach Ertz was still 4th despite having, I guess the receivers were missing for the Eagles, but still still had to do with Dallas Goedert.
And what you were mentioning about Dallas Goedert, he had 87 targets compared to Ertz's 135. So it's like not even like he has double it. It's like he took a lot of
backup.
I would say. Yeah, his backup.
Goddard's not even a true backup, so it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Wait, so Keshav, I just have a question for you. Like, so where do you think like Ertz should be ranked? Because like I think I've looked through the list and I feel like the only 2 tight ends I see are Kelsey and Kittle that are ahead of him. Do you say he's in that range or?
I mean, I don't think in the Kelsey range. I mean, the Kelsey Kittle range is too high. I mean, I don't think he should be top 30, but maybe at least in the 40s or 50s. I would say.
Yeah. 50 seems reasonable.
Yeah, 50 seems reasonable to me.
I'm surprised. I don't know if any of you guys are going to take him later, but Mark, really quickly before we move on to Chirag, Mark Andrews should have been on this list, and he's not. So the Ravens are weirdly being slept on, despite, I mean, other than Lamar Jackson being number 1, I thought there's a lot of guys here who should have been higher.
And as we discussed earlier, the Chiefs too, the 2 best teams in the AFC. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then Chirag, next pick.
Yes, we're next pick. Going to talk about another
Devontae. I think it's Ankit's.
No, it's mine.
Nope.
Oh, it's yours. Oh, yeah, I'll come first.
So we're going to talk about another Devontae, wide receiver, but it's going to be Devontae Parker this time. So, throughout his career, he's had a lot of issues with catching the ball. He's had a lot of drops, but this season he's been able to get 1,202 yards while also getting 9 TDs, which is just an amazing quarterback season in general. 5th in yards.
Great quarterback.
Wide receiver season, 5th in yards, and then 4th in touchdowns. And for this Miami team, there wasn't a lot going for them in general. They were projected to go 0-16. Known as like supposed to be the worst team in the NFL, but they still managed to go 5-11. And I think some of the success is due to Devontae
Parker.
Yeah, Devontae Parker stepping up. Especially because there wasn't many weapons in this offense. Especially after they traded Kenyon Drake, who was he wasn't having a great season in general. So I think he was the one bright spot in this Miami season.
Yeah.
Other thing about Devontae Parker, he was literally the only target. So Preston Williams, the number 2 receiver, got injured partway into the season, missed a lot of time. And Devontae Parker was literally the only guy, which there's always arguments for and against that. Like for on one side of things, obviously he's getting all the targets, but on the other side, who else is the defense going to focus on, right? It's just Devontae Parker still puts up 9 touchdowns and at a really high efficiency rate there. So at he had 17 yards per catch or something like that. 16.7. Really good player.
Yeah, which is very high. And when you're talking about elite receivers, Michael Thomas is 11.6 yards, and but also
I feel like. I just feel like.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What the hell is this?
Okay. So I just feel like I think another thing to consider about Devontae Parker is like the type of quarterbacks he's had to like play with. I mean, like this past season, he had Ryan Fitzpatrick. Then before that, he had like Ryan Tannehill. He had like Brock Osweiler for a bit. I mean, like when you consider like all these things, I feel like you got to consider the situation. I feel like when you look at Michael Thomas, I mean, he's been blessed to play with one of the best quarterbacks in the game, Drew Brees. So I feel like that's also important to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back to Rhodes' point about how the defense will focus on Devontae Parker. One of his highlights of the season was their Week 17 win against the Patriots, where Gilmore was actually still playing, but Devontae still had a monster game. But I think he should have still been mentioned on this list, especially with other guys that have similar stats as him, similar team performance. So I think he still outshined them.
All right, Ankit, who is your next guy?
Oh, so my next guy was gonna be what Rohit was sort of referring to previously, and that was my tight end, which was Darren Waller. So I was just looking at his stats, and I was actually shocked to see that he had over 1,000 receiving yards. And the reason I was shocked is because when I look at the Raiders offense, and especially like Derek Carr at quarterback, I didn't really think that he would be shining that much. I mean, I saw his games against the Chiefs, and I felt like he really did stand out, but I didn't know he stood out to a point where he had more receiving yards than Zach Ertz, and like I felt like when I saw that, I knew that he definitely was a top 3 tight end this year, and I felt like you should definitely put Waller over Ertz, especially like during this past year.
Keshav, we'll clap back at that.
So I'm just pulling up Waller stats real quick, and looking at Waller's year, I can agree that both of these guys should be moved up a bit. I can actually, I'll totally agree on that. But both of them should be at least in the 50s range, I would say.
Yeah.
And I mean, comparing which one is better, looking at the season comprehensively, I mean, Darren Waller, I think on less targets too, produced more, I would say. So I mean, I feel like it's fair to make the case that he should be higher than Ertz, but I think they should both be moved up.
I mean, then there's a whole deal with Ertz. Keshav, you said over the last 3-4 years has been elite. Waller obviously just came out of nowhere. The one thing that I guess you could make an argument for, you could like NFL players probably respect Darren Waller a whole lot. He has a really interesting story. I think he struggled with addiction. Was a late round pick, cut from the Ravens, and then he came out of nowhere for the Raiders, right? And that's something that would warrant, like, if you're a player, I would imagine you would have voted this guy a lot higher. That's a non-statistical look at things, but there's multiple angles, and he was great for the Raiders last year.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the second half of this. We're looking at guys who we think were ranked too high, and Ankit, you'll snake around. Who's your first pick?
I mean, I wouldn't say this is an interesting pick, but just because of his name recognition, I went with J.J. Watt. I mean, when you think of J.J. Watt, you think of his seasons where he's got like 20 sacks and he's just dominating the league. But when you look at 2019, I mean, the guy's only played 8 games. So it's kind of unfair when you look at like what other people do, such as like Darren Waller, who play all these 16 games and they still get ranked 99. But then when you look at J.J. Watt and he plays 8 games and somehow he's still number 45. And even in those 8 games, he didn't really produce like spectacular stats. I mean, he had 4 sacks, but like nothing else really stood out.
And yeah, J.J. Watt's not the same player he really once was. I mean, due to injuries and all.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like seeing, where exactly was he on the list?
45.
45.
45. Yeah, I can agree that's pretty high. Which range, around what range would you think he should be? Do you even think he should be in the list?
I mean, just because he didn't play that many games, I feel like I don't even think he should be on this list because like when you look at the last person, it's Frank Clark, and if we're comparing him to Frank Clark, then that's not really a realistic comparison.
I mean, I would agree. 4 sacks in 8 games is pretty underwhelming, and he's but the 2018 season, So 2018 season was really,
Really
really
good.
crazy for
Yeah.
him. He played 16 games, started 16 games, had 16 sacks.
Seven
I'm
forced
sure-
fumbles. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the players are going to ignore that ever, right? And that was at age 29 too, so he's like at the end, if not out of his prime, for an NFL player. 45 is a bit high, I would say. So the next guy on that list, right after J.J. Watt, next pass rusher, Zadarius Smith was exceptional for the Packers. I would have had Zadarius a bit higher than J.J. Watt. Chris Jones too. Chris Jones, a guy who missed a little bit of time. But Chris Jones, the only real knock on him, in my opinion, is that run defense. As a pass rusher, he's done a lot more than JJ, at least in the last year. 2018 for Watt's next, amazing. But we're in 2020 now.
No, yeah, and this list, I mean, I guess takes into account a couple years of their veteran presence, how long they've been in the league. That's why you kind of see like guys like Darren Waller, for example, not getting as much, recognition.
The same with
Also,
Zadarius Smith, who
last
kind of
season-
came out of nowhere.
Also, last season, he was recovering from a pectoral injury, and I think he fast-tracked his rehab. So I assume that this list is assuming that he comes back healthier this season.
Yeah.
I think he'll be good this year. He should be good, but I don't know. Right now,
Yeah.
45 might be a little high. And
So
next
Chirag,
pick,
yeah.
Yeah, so for this one, it might be controversial, but I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers as being too high on this list.
that's wow.
Man.
Looking at the stats, it was an average year, but for Aaron Rodgers, it was a very disappointing year.
But he's
last
Aaron
season-
Rodgers, It's Aaron Rodgers.
Okay, sure, but
As
he
Chirag
was,
would say.
he's 11th. He was 11th in yards. He was 10th in TDs. Obviously it's Aaron Rodgers. He had 4 interceptions. Just it's amazing what he can still do at this age, but I feel like it's way too high for his performance that he had, especially because I felt like this season the defense carried the Packers a lot more than he did on offense, which was very different from past years with the Packers. You would see Aaron Rodgers having to bring back his team, but yeah, we didn't see a lot of that this season.
And I mean, you
It
were
almost
saying
seemed like Aaron-
statistically though. I mean, you were saying looking at it statistically, the numbers do look pretty good. And obviously, from what we see, we saw Aaron Rodgers wasn't as sharp as he was in previous seasons. But I mean, to say that the defense really carried that team in a lot of games, I think is a little unfair to say. I mean, they were great. I think they were great, but I mean, I think they fell off after a certain point in the year.
There's certain stats though that I think reflect poorly of Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers at his peak, 2011. This was the highest this number was at. That year he had a 9% touchdown percentage. This year was all the way down to 4.6%. There's a misconception about the Packers offense that they're a run heavy. They run a lot, but they actually threw the ball quite often. They were, I think, in the top half of the league in passing percentage. But this was definitely, I would agree with Chirag. This was an offense. It almost seemed like, so the defense is great, but this almost felt like the Aaron Jones show most days. I did watch like a fair amount of Packers games because of fantasy, Devonta Adams and Aaron Jones. And Aaron Rodgers didn't really pass the eye test. You just didn't see those great downfield plays. I don't know if that's because of Matt LaFleur's offense or if it was because of a decline in Aaron Rodgers' quality, but it just didn't feel right for Aaron Rodgers.
And I guess it's been like this for the past 2 years. I mean, even in 2018, I think he took some heat. He took some heat for his play, even though his stats looked wonderful. Just passing the eye test, it didn't look like the same Aaron Rodgers that once was.
I still feel like last season, a lot of the games we saw that Aaron Rodgers come back, like that Bears game. We just saw the classic Aaron Rodgers, willing his team back into the game. But this season, we just didn't see a lot of that. It seemed like they broke down a lot more. Against like the Niners, for example, we just saw a lot of breakdowns, not a lot of comeback from Aaron.
I feel like at this point of the list, and again, we want to quickly move on because this has been Aaron Rodgers. This last week has been going on for a while, but at this point in the list, you should be looking at alpha types, and at the very top, obviously Lamar, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, Drew Brees. I would still say is in that elite category. Tom Brady is very questionable. I don't think he's at alpha anymore, but whatever. We're not talking about Tom Brady. after him, got Deshaun Watson. That's a true alpha. Like his defining play might be that eyes closed touchdown. That was insane. I don't think Aaron Rodgers last year was ever going to do that. And then there's a big break after that in terms of quarterbacks. But that part of the list should be for those alphas, in my opinion. And then Keshav, so move on to your third pick here.
So, I mean, I love this guy. He's one of my favorite players ever. But I was surprised that Larry Fitz was at 69 on the list. And not to say that he's bad now, that he's lost his glory, but he isn't as good as he once was. And I mean, just looking at it statistically, he's only 12 spots behind. He's above Keenan Allen. He's only 12 spots behind Devontae Adams, 10 spots behind Odell Beckham. And just looking at the other receivers in the list, it seems like he's pretty high. I mean, there's another guy that wasn't on this list that I wish was, for example, Kenny Golladay. I mean, he had a phenomenal year. And I know Larry Fitz is just a great veteran, but I think on just looking at this year specifically, he didn't really perform at the level you would earn him that spot on the list.
He hasn't even posted 1,000 yards since 2017. He hasn't even posted over 804. Last year at 804. Hasn't topped that since 2017 either. So it's been a few rough seasons. I mean, it makes sense. He's 36.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's like this
list
is
really
flawed.
It's not a knock on him, but it just doesn't really make sense considering where everyone else is.
Yeah, and Chirag and I have talked about some receivers. I think Bobby Trees should be above him. You think Kenny Golladay. Chirag mentioned Devontae Parker. There's also guys like DJ Moore.
Allen Robinson, maybe.
Allen Robinson. Yeah, a lot of receivers who should have been ranked higher. Honestly, A.J. Brown too. But, yeah, way too high. And then I'll go with my next two picks. The first one is going to be Logan Ryan, who, in my opinion, this was the worst one on this entire list. Not even close, in my opinion. Logan Ryan. So it's a very basic question to ask. What exactly warranted this position for Logan Ryan? He's a 29-year-old cornerback who's been in the league for a handful of years, has never ranked in the top 100. What exactly did he do this past season to put him at number 60? He's higher than Marlon Humphrey, who Chirag thinks, or who brought him up? Chirag, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you thought he should have been higher than Marcus Peters, I think, and I would there's an argument there for sure. How is Logan Ryan? Logan Ryan was just one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL last year. If you just look at the base stats, you see 4 interceptions and you're like, okay, you can understand that. But the dude gave up 781 receiving yards, and that was amongst the highest in the league. He also missed 11 tackles, gave up a 66% completion percentage, which was somehow down from the previous year. And that's absurd. He's also a slot cornerback. So he's not like, he's inside and he's giving up 780 yards at a tremendously high clip. He also gave up 5 touchdowns, which is really high. There just wasn't I don't understand. I just didn't understand this one at all. There's a reason he's still a free agent. You could argue that maybe he's just asking for too much money, but I don't think that's it. I think there's also the fact that he was just terrible last year. I don't know how he ended up 60.
Yeah, especially when, there are guys like Marshawn Lattimore, Earl Thomas, that are behind him on the list. It just doesn't make sense. Especially
and even on his
successful
team.
that year.
Even on his
like
own
Harrison Smith. Even Harrison Smith too.
Rohit, do you even think Logan Ryan should be in the top 100 at all? Or...
No, I don't think he should. If I were to name my top 150 players, I don't think Logan Ryan would have come to mind. To be honest with you, because even on his own team, Kevin Byard's a safety, but still, he was just outside the top 100. Kevin Byard should have been above. Who am I talking about? Logan Ryan. Adoree Jackson, same thing. Adoree had a pretty terrible 2018, but Logan Ryan just this last year was incredibly terrible. Maybe over Malcolm Butler, but Logan Ryan has I don't think there's an argument for him, and that's where it kind of gets kind of insane. If you can't argue for a guy, then why is he even in the vicinity of the top 100. Okay, enough of this Logan Ryan hate. Logan Ryan is this episode's Matt Barnes. This episode's JJ Redick, Niall Davis of sorts. And my second pick, this one, I don't know if this is controversial or not. Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley was ranked pretty high, 51. And the running backs on this list are few and far between. Like the 51, and the next guy after him is all the way at 72, Josh Jacobs. Todd Gurley he's still a good player. I do not think he's a bad player. He had one of the worst offensive lines in football last year. The offense in general was just really bad. Jared Goff regressed in pretty much every aspect of the game. They also had to play in a pretty tough division, the Niners twice. So this was just not a great situation for Todd Gurley to be in. But on the other hand, the knee injuries definitely showed. He didn't look as explosive. He wasn't as much of a factor in the passing game or really any aspect of the game. There's a reason he was cut. It was contract as well as just the fact that he's on the decline, right? And 51 is too high. I'd rather have Josh Jacobs, who I said went at 72. Even guys later on in the list, Chris Carson is a lot more dynamic than Todd Gurley is at this point in his career. So I didn't really agree with Todd Gurley at 51. I think he should be on the list, but not that high.
Yeah, and I mean, as you were pointing out, the offense wasn't as effective this year. The O-line was not good, but he still wasn't the same Todd Gurley. Amid all those issues with the knee and all, I mean, he wasn't the same player he was the 2 previous years before.
Yeah. Okay, and then the next pick, Keshav?
Yeah. Next, I took Stephon Diggs, and he was at around, I think he should be in the list, but he was at 54. And my problem is the placement is above Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, and Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen. And those are 2 guys that I think are, better than Diggs. And in fact, I would say maybe even had better seasons. Just looking at how well Diggs did this season regardless, it wasn't really like he put up super impressive numbers or anything. He had 63 receptions, 1,100 yards, but I do think that Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams are both just better receivers, because if you look at Devontae Adams, for example, he was on pace to put up how many yards? Or like 1,300 if he had played the full season?
If he'd played the full season, something like that. But if you look at just the second half of the year, it would have been closer to 1,600.
Yeah. And I think, I think he should be in the list, maybe around the 60s or something. But I think just above Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen's a bit much.
Yeah, I would agree. Trying to move on quicker here. Chirag, your final pick, your too high guy.
Yeah, so for my second too high guy, we talk about Ryan Tannehill. I know, this season he really came out of nowhere. Basically, we thought he would just be a backup quarterback on Tennessee. He came out of nowhere, performed extremely well for what we thought Ryan Tannehill was at this point in his career. Last season he wasn't so great, but I still think he's too high on this list just because he performed better than we thought he would. But I still don't think that he deserved his position of 68 on this list.
This is one of the players in my opinion, because he's above Matt Ryan, who Matt Ryan again had a pretty good year. Like, I don't think there's any problem with him. I don't know why he fell out of the list. Stafford was hurt most of the year, but I would say Stafford's better. Kyler, I know, like Ankit, you mentioned Kyler Murray earlier, or Keshav, one of you guys.
It just, even Josh Allen, to be honest, I'd probably take over Ryan Tannehill.
I think that's a good segue.
Yeah,
what do you say, Ryan Tannehill? What's your statement?
Yeah, I was about to say, I felt like this season, the Tennessee, it was really a Derrick Henry show. He really popped off this season. Ryan, he played well. He was a very dynamic quarterback, contrary to what people thought he was at this point in his career. But I still don't think he warrants his position, especially because he led it. I wouldn't call it leading his team in the playoffs, but he wasn't a negative to his team. But I still don't think he deserves his position at 68.
And Chirag just mentioned this guy earlier. And now for Ankit's final pick.
Yeah, I just wanted to make my final pick. Josh Allen. I felt like I know this is a bit of a controversial pick, especially for, I know Chirag disagreed with it, but I felt like the highlight for the Buffalo Bills was definitely their defense. I mean, there were games where if the offense performed like an average offense, like if Josh Allen showed up, I felt like they definitely could have been a strong team in the playoffs. But as we know, they choked in the first round against the Houston Texans when Deshaun just went into his Clemson God mode and just came back in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
This is like weird. This is one of those situations where Josh Allen's disrespected so many people in the league. You see these hurdles. He just trucks people. He's a really athletic player who I do think maybe at the end of next year definitely warrants a top 100 position. I think there's big things in store with him with Diggs. But those highlight plays might have elevated him more than anything. Like,
No,
where was he ranked? 87? Again, I keep on mentioning Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan's better. Just how it is.
And I think another reason.
Playoff game. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And I think another reason that he was a little high was because he's also pretty effective as a running quarterback. You know, he put up around like 510 yards on the ground with 9 touchdowns. And I think that's one of the main reasons he got up there, because his passing stats are obviously not great. And I would say they're improving. He's a really promising young talent. But I think it was the running game that kind of got him up there in the first place.
I mean, that's really the only reason. I shouldn't say the only reason. The team did well, so that boosted him. But yeah, the rushing ability is definitely what puts him over the top. But like, I don't know, just does it really warrant 3 higher than the offensive rookie of the year, Kyler Murray, who I do think I think Kyler Murray did more with less. You know, like the offensive last year at least, offensive line and the skill position players was a mess until they got Kenny and Drake at least. I don't know. Matt Ryan, Stafford. Who else would we put over Josh Allen? Ankit, who do you think?
I mean, honestly, I'd probably, I don't know if he's on this list. Maybe even like, is Philip Rivers on this list?
No, he's not.
He's not, but I feel like he'd definitely be over him. I mean, I felt like the Chargers, they did have an unlucky season where there were games where they should have won, but they lost, and it was a 1-possession game. But I'd definitely take Philip Rivers and his experience over Josh Allen.
I'm sorry, but Phil Rivers just had a bad season, though. I mean, it wasn't a good season.
Yes, he had a bad season, but like, yeah.
It's one of those weird things. We've been talking about this a lot, where track record seems to place guys higher. Larry Fitz, obviously. Philip Rivers is a different situation where they pretty much just looked at this last year and said, "Oh, this guy was bad," and they kick him off to 110. I do think, I don't know, for their future outlook, maybe you'll take Josh Allen. But if you're answering the question, who is a better quarterback right now, then it's more arguable Phillips above him. I mean, there's other guys too who like. Would you rather have? I know this isn't like super relevant to the list, but would you rather have Joe Burrow or Josh Allen right now? Just straight, as it is.
I mean, Burrow. I think Burrow. He's gonna be the future of the league.
Would you have Teddy B over Josh Allen?
Before any of us answer that question, I think, or I think we just ignore that altogether. But we covered our 16 players there. There's some controversial picks. There's some that more people would agree with. I think I've seen a lot of things about Logan Ryan. I've seen stuff about Aaron Rodgers too, Ryan Tannehill. A lot of these guys, even JJ Watt has come up. But we've covered some big players. We've covered some more obscure ones that we think were slept on. But I think this was a productive episode. Ankit, anything to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to say again, thanks for having me on. And just like to say that the Chiefs are about to win back-to-back Super Bowls.
Yeah, I think with or without Damian Williams, the Chiefs are a pretty good team. Obviously, the 3 of us here are going to take the Niners, but the Chiefs are looking good again for 2020. But I think that'll just about do it for the 6th episode of TTP. We will see you on Monday. Peace.